The idea really is that we're going through this incredible transition period now where digital media practices are emerging alongside the older media practices that were associated with the broadcast, when broadcast media and print media were the most important media for politics. But we've not seen the outright replacement of older media forms and practices. We're seeing instead an intermingling and a coexistence relationship where the practices of older and newer media are interdependent. So if you look at, for instance, the way that news cycles are developing now and the way that political elites try to intervene in news cycles in order to change the agenda, to steer information flows in a particular direction, they're now having to perform that alongside ordinary citizens, activists, people who just happen to be momentarily engaged online. And as a result, we're seeing a destabilization, if you will, of the elite-driven political communication environment that was typical of the broadcast era. However, at the same time, we're seeing adaptation, and we're seeing a restatement of the power of political elites in this environment. So I think what we're looking at with the hybrid media system is a mixing of the logics of the older media system that we saw from the 1970s onwards, with the rise of television in particular as being important, and the rise of the internet from, really in mass terms anyway, the late 2000s, when platforms like Facebook and Twitter became much more important and many more people started to use the internet. Those are huge challenges, and they're partly created by, well, first of all, a decline in trust in elite media, which is a phenomenon that's happening across the liberal democratic world. But secondly, the rise of alternative sources of media and the fact that people now are much more likely to encounter their news on social media platforms, particularly Facebook. On the other hand, I think what we've got to bear in mind as well is that traditional media organizations are, to a certain extent, renewing themselves, reinventing themselves. So I don't think it's a question of either or, it's a question of not only, but also, which is an English formulation, which says if we're going to look at one thing, we should also look at something else as well and bring the whole picture together, rather than just constructing these binaries where we say, look, social media are destroying professional media, or that the old hierarchies of political parties, for instance, are being destroyed by social media and new forms of organization. It's not as simple as that. So one of the interesting things I think we need to bear in mind here is the role and the responsibility of platforms themselves. So we're now in a situation where Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course Instagram is owned by Facebook, they need to start thinking very carefully about their information environments, and they need to think about how, just as, for instance, a firm, if it was polluting a stream as a byproduct of manufacturing a product, say a car, for instance, that firm should be held to account in order to make sure that the natural environment isn't polluted. I think we're facing a similar debate about the role of platforms. Platforms provide lots of wonderful things. We find them really great for connecting in our everyday lives, for sharing photos of our family and friends, for mobilizing our political interests. All of that is wonderful stuff, as a believer in democracy, as I am. But at the same time, if they have dysfunctional elements that pollute democratic politics, they should be held to account. And I think that this is a very interesting argument. I'm not advocating strong regulation. What I'm saying is the sheer size and mass of these platforms. Nobody would have predicted 10 years ago that Facebook would have grown to 2 billion users. So this creates a problem, and I think going forward for the next 10 years, it's probably going to be one of the biggest problems in our media systems in the liberal democratic world.